Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of comprehensive news analysis with the first article that we have, which talks about the new guidelines that were declared by the ICMR on the 10th of January. The author here says that the new guidelines that talk about the fact that not everyone needs to get tested for COVID is actually positive considering the ongoing situation in the country. As per the recently released guidelines, the people who do not need to be tested are the ones who are asymptomatic and the contacts who are confirmed cases of COVID 19 unless they are at an extremely high risk. The author here says that the ICMR strategy is perfectly fine because even when you are a contact of a COVID person, you have to assume that you are COVID positive and you have to start treatment accordingly. Rather than testing everyone, which we did in the first and the second waves, the focus of the government and the ICMR now has to be on improving the public health system, on making sure that the treatment procedure that is given for COVID is followed rigorously throughout the country in an extremely positive manner. Now, many people, as I said, are criticizing the policy, saying that the earlier policy of testing each and everyone, those who want to get tested, was a good sign and it should have been continued. However, the author gives reasons for his argument. The author here says that in the beginning, that is during the first and the second waves, nations followed the containment strategy to prevent the community spread of the virus. This needed much more testing. India also in that period set up about 3,100 new labs and increased its testing capacity to test up to 20 lakh RT-PCR samples every single day. This testing was for two purposes. Firstly, for individual health, to get to know whether you are contracted with COVID or not so that your treatment can begin. And secondly, to understand how much has the infection spread across the country. But interestingly, if a person is asymptomatic, as many people are right now, and they test positive, even then there is no specific different procedure given for their treatment. Their treatment follows the same policy as it was before the test. So, what exactly was the profit of testing so many people? Secondly, the concept of community spread or the spread of infection that we wanted to determine with testing, as per the author, now we have to assume, at least with Omicron having such a high rate of transmission, that community spread is a reality and was a reality in India long time back. So there is no need for the government now to see how much is the virus spreading and is it spreading through community transmission or not, because that is an accepted reality by now. You would have noticed that in the past few months the availability of home testing kits, that is the rapid antigen test kits, has also improved. The government and the ICMR labs have also been saying that if you have any doubt over your health, you can buy the ICMR certified kits in the market and test it yourself at your home. But the problem with those kits is that they are only 50% efficient. While RT-PCR is a golden standard when it comes to COVID testing, but these kind of kits don't really give an exact idea. And these kits also don't come cheap. In India, where as per the government, 80 crore people are dependent on free ration given by the government, do you think many people will be buying testing kits by themselves and using it, especially when you know that the test results of this kit cannot be trusted entirely? Yes, it is a fact that the capacity of the labs has increased. We have many more labs that can test many more samples. If you remember, in the beginning of coronavirus in March 2020, it was almost impossible to get yourself tested. I can give you my own personal example. In March 2020, when the coronavirus had just started, I had visited Turkey on a holiday. In Turkey itself, for a couple of days, I had some symptoms of coronavirus. I lost my taste, I lost my smell, I did not want to eat anything, I had fever, etc. Till the time that I came back to India, my symptoms had gone, but I still wanted to get myself tested. So I went to a facility in Delhi, that is Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia. But at that point of time, that is in March 2020, there were hardly 100 to 150 tests being conducted throughout the country because we did not have the kits and the government was saving these tests for very bad cases. I was told that you won't get any tests, you just stay at home and just isolate yourself for 10 days and you will be fine. Despite telling them that I had all the symptoms, I had traveled outside India, I may have come in contact with other people, but I was not allowed to take the test. So from that point onwards, since March 2020, when we had almost zero tests across the country, to a time when you can just call up any laboratory and the people will come at your home to take your samples, we have come a long way. However, for a country like India, whose scale is immense, we cannot misuse this capacity of the labs because every test kit at the end of the day costs money. The public health infrastructure needs to be used judiciously. Also, the author here says that I see nothing wrong in the government changing its policy. With every changing stage of the pandemic, the government must change its policy to tackle the new challenges. And the recent advisory by the ICMR is a step in that direction only. Rather than that, the government should focus on ensuring that home isolation guidelines are followed by people throughout the country, and the people who want to get admitted to the hospital are only admitted when they meet certain guidelines, while others should stay at home and isolate themselves. I'm sure you also would have noticed that in this particular wave, even when the people are getting infected, thankfully the quantum of infection is not that high, and a lot of people are getting better within a few days, which is a positive sign. And thus, the ICMR is not wrong in suggesting that there is no need to burden the labs and the hospitals all of a sudden, because we are in a much better situation as compared to where we were in the first and the second waves. Now, this article makes a mention of two types of tests, the RT-PCR and the rapid antigen test. Let me tell you the difference between the two, because these have been the buzzwords for over a year and a half. Let's first start with the RT-PCR test. It stands for reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. Now, the polymerase chain reaction, that is the PCR test, usually uses the ability of the enzyme to make new DNAs, and when there are enough DNA copies available, to test whether or not there is presence of a virus or not. But the problem with COVID virus is that it does not have a DNA. It is made up of RNA. So the first step is RNA needs to be converted into DNA. That is why you first apply reverse transcription technology. The reverse transcription technology converts RNA into DNA because RNA is single stranded and very unstable, and thus it is not easy to test the presence of virus in an RNA. After it is converted to DNA, multiple copies are made and amplified, and then the test begins. A fluorescent DNA binding dye called the probe shows the presence of the virus in the human body. At present, this test is considered as the most accurate one present throughout the world. As I said earlier, the difference between the PCR and RT-PCR is that the PCR test uses double-stranded DNA, while RT-PCR uses RNA, converts it into DNA, and then starts the test. The other test that is usually used with the home kits is called rapid antigen detection test. It is a test which uses your nasal samples to detect whether or not you have antigens in your body. It tries to detect the presence of antigens which are found within the COVID virus. It can be performed outside a laboratory setting, so you can just buy a kit from the market and test yourself at home. These tests provide results for an active coronavirus infection much faster than the RT-PCR test, but they have a very high chance of missing an active infection. Why? Because the sample is only collected from the nose. Because it is the nose of the human body where there is a highest chance of the virus being present. But if the virus is present in some other part of the body, the rapid antigen test will not detect that. So if the rapid antigen test says that you are negative, means you don't have coronavirus, that is not 100% true. You have to confirm it with the PCR test also. If it says positive, then you are sure that yes, you have coronavirus. But even if it says negative, it can be a false negative also, and you have to get yourself tested with the RT-PCR. The reason why this rapid antigen detection test is used is because it can give a result within 30 minutes if needed. But as the article says, it is not extremely accurate and cannot be trusted. The next article that we have is written by a former member of the Planning Commission, Shri Arun Maira. The article here says that the governments across the world have tried the economic policy of communism and have tried the economic policy of capitalism as well. But none of them have given the desired results in any country across the world, and thus there is a need to come up with a new policy that is based on the Gandhian democratic socialist principles. The author here says that economies across the world are not doing well, even though you might consider that it is because of COVID, but even in the pre-COVID era, most of the economies around the world were in a downslide. While the rich in all these nations are getting richer, the poor people are just not getting the results for their hard work. The top 1% in any country across the world is the one that is getting even stronger by every passing day, and the same is the case with India. We expected that there would be a trickle down effect, that is, when some people become rich, their wealth will trickle down to other parts of the society, but that has not happened. In fact, inequalities of wealth have only increased throughout the world, with India especially becoming one of the most unequal nations in the entire world. The author then compares India of pre 1991 reforms and post 1991 reforms. The author says that in the past 30 years, that is, since the 1991 reforms, India has seen weakening of democracy and secularism, increasing inequalities in economy, and unsustainable economic growth. Now, you may argue that after 1991, India's growth rate has become much better as compared to earlier. But the point that the author is making is that that growth rate has only benefited some people in the country. Because if the policies of LPG would have been so good, we should not have any poor people in the country right now, right? But the number of poor people in the country is still extremely high. Means somewhere down the line, these policies of LPG, that is privatization, liberalization, have not worked. And when the government knows that it cannot provide a good life to the people, when the government understands that their economic policies are not working, governments have no option but to divert people's attention and make use of authoritarianism, policy of nationalism, and identity politics. Identity politics refers to using the face of one single popular leader and ensuring that people vote for that leader irrespective of any policies that he or she introduces. For example, right now, a large section of Indian population supports Prime Minister Modi irrespective of the fact that many of his economic policies have not worked well for the country, irrespective of the fact that the government's handling of the second coronavirus wave was not up to the mark. That is an indication of identity politics, when the identity of the leader overshadows any policy that the government may introduce, be it good or bad. The policy of liberalism that India especially has been following after 1991, as per the author, has resulted in the rise of anti-liberal societies and the governments. This is not to say that we should go back to the era of pre 1991. Since then, a lot of successful policies have been introduced, that is, reduction in taxes and ease of doing business. However, the author says that there needs to be a combination of the two. The government cannot liberalize everything and allow the private sector to turn every sector into a profit making business. He gives an example of the Western nations. Nations such as the US and in Western Europe, till 1970s at least, had a very high tax. The reason for it was that the money that the government was actually collecting from the taxes was used to build social infrastructure such as health and education. Once the base of that infrastructure was built, after 1970s, there was a reduction in the taxes, which allowed some people to create wealth and turn into capitalists that we see today. Due to privatization now, however, in India till 1990, when we had high taxes, the government did not utilize that to build any solid public infrastructure. So the same idea cannot be applied in India. In fact, due to privatization now, government does not have any more resources to provide public goods to the people. Whatever was public is now being converted into private. Now over here, let me also give you a bit of background about the theory of liberalism and how it has evolved in the Western countries. As you know, countries such as US, UK, etc. have been renowned as the hub of capitalism. In very simple terms, capitalism refers to an economic ideology in which the private sector has the freedom to undertake business in whatever way that they want and the government will not interfere. So since the beginning of industrial revolution, US, UK, etc., these countries allowed the businesses to run in whatever way that they want without any interference from the government. So for example, if the business leaders wanted to pay lesser salary to the workers, government did not pay, government did not interfere. If they did not want to give any holiday to the workers, the government did not interfere, etc. This policy was working well till the 1930s when the US saw the Great Depression. The Great Depression was the first huge stock market crash seen in the US. It led to a bad recession not just in US but also in most of Europe because these economies were connected. One of the reasons why this happened was that the government did not have enough control over the market and the private sector was just running after profit. Thus, in 1930s, it was realized that the government cannot let everything free. The government must have at least some control over the market. So it is said that after 1930s, US, UK, etc. started making policies that were very close to socialist policies. This was to bring the economy back on track. This went on till 1970s when all of a sudden people again realized that government interference is becoming too much. In fact, there was a phrase that emerged in 1970s. That phrase was nanny state. That our government is becoming a nanny state means they are, nannies that take care of little child. So there was a kind of a campaign in the US and UK in 1970s which was called roll back the frontiers of the state. People demanded that again privatization should be in focus and the government should remove its control. This is what in 1970s led to reduction of taxes and much more freedom being given to the businesses. These are different stages of liberalism. In fact, this era of roll back the frontiers of the state is called as neoliberalism, means return of liberalism in a new form. Now coming back to the author's point. The author is saying that in the condition of lower economic growth, when people don't have enough jobs, when the government can't provide for the people, these are ideal situations for identity politics. If you look at history, for example, and you look at the rise of Hitler, how did it happen? After World War One, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, Germany was in such a bad situation that they had no economic growth, they had a high debt, they had to pay back money to US and other European countries, and there was nothing good happening in the country. At that time, a leader such as Hitler came up and started giving speeches saying that if you vote for me, I will take Germany back to the days of its glory. If you vote for me, I will make your life much better. In that kind of a gloomy situation, you have no option, and then you start believing in a hero that sells you a big dream. That is an ideal situation for identity politics, which is extremely bad for the country because then the people start electing authoritarian governments as solutions, which should never be the case. The author also says that after 1970s, when the US went back to its liberal approach, again the US is realizing the fact that the government must control certain resources, and that is why in the past few years there has been a rise in popularity of socialist leaders in the US, for example Bernie Sanders. So US again seems to be going back towards socialism, which is not going well with the liberal leaders in the country because they want everything to be in the hands of the private entity. Now, towards the end of this article, the author here is making a point that we saw nations such as USSR and China follow the policy of communism. We have seen nations such as US and UK following the policy of capitalism, and we have seen that both of these have not given the desired results for any country. Thus, right now is a time to blend these two together and make sure that we have new economic policies coming up in the form of Gandhian democratic socialism. Now, Gandhian democratic socialism refers to a policy where you allow the private sector to exist and build wealth over time, however, not at the cost of the poor people in the country. The government must ensure that there are certain sectors of the society which are under the government control so that the bottommost population of India is provided for by the government while the top population can sustain for themselves. Now, in this article, there is also a mention of something called Washington Consensus that you might have read in Indian economy. Let's go back to what exactly was Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus actually is a set of policies announced by institutions headquartered in Washington. It came in the 1980s at a time when most of the Latin American, that is South American countries were undergoing an economic crisis due to various reasons, such as mounting external debt, sudden increase in the price of crude oil, increase in population growth rate, and much more. This was a time that most of the Latin American economies were looking for support from outside institutions such as the IMF. That is when a 10-pointer economic policy was released collectively by IMF, World Bank, and the US Treasury Department. This was called Washington Consensus. In simple terms, this was a suggestion to Latin American and other economies around the world about how to improve your economic situation. These were: introduce fiscal discipline, avoid large fiscal deficits related to your GDP, redirect public spending from subsidies towards provision of pro-growth, pro-poor services, introduce tax reforms, have interest rates that are determined by the market, have competitive exchange rates, liberalize the trade, liberalize the FDI coming into the country, privatize the state enterprises, deregulate, and ensure that there are legal security rights for your IPR. That is, anyone who makes or invents anything should be protected by a patent, copyright, or trademark. Now, these were just in the form of suggestions to Latin American countries, but they were also imposed as conditions for the countries who wanted to take a loan from IMF or the World Bank. That is why even today, many countries such as Sri Lanka, you would see, don't want to take a loan from the IMF because the loan from the IMF comes with a lot of conditions about how can you spend that money that the IMF is actually giving you. These were considered as extremely strict, and that's why many of these policies were now softened by the World Bank in the decade of the 2000s because of political pressure from countries across the world. While the IMF still retains many of these policies, the World Bank, in its loans, has decided to do away with most of these policies given in the Washington Consensus. The next article that we have talks about the change at the leadership in ISRO. As you would have read in the news, ISRO has a new chairman in the form of Sri Somnath, who till now was ahead of the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center at Thiruvananthapuram. He will succeed Mr. K. Sivan, who served his term as the ISRO chairperson. During the tenure of the new chief, there are a lot of important programs lined up for ISRO, including ISRO's first human space flight program, that is Gaganyaan, sun exploration program, that is Aditya L1, and ISRO's march towards privatization. In fact, the first announcement for privatization was made in 2019 itself when NSIL, that is New Space India Limited, was established. The NSIL will take up multiple activities such as providing launch services, building customized launch vehicles, offer services of Earth observation, etc. Now, while the information given from this article ends here, let's go ahead and discuss about the NSIL, that is New Space India Limited. As the article says, it was established in 2019 and is a government-owned undertaking. It will work under the Department of Space, and essentially, it will try and exploit the commercial arm of ISRO. So as you know, ISRO is one of the world leaders when it comes to space technology, and it offers services to other countries as well. Let's take an example of a small country. Let's say Maldives wants to send a satellite into space because they want to keep a track of their own territory. Now, they may not have a space agency as good as ISRO, so they may not have a launch vehicle. Other countries such as US and France will take a lot of money from Maldives for this service. This is when ISRO comes in. ISRO will provide launch vehicle services to Maldives. We may also build a satellite for them and charge them money for this. Till now, this work was done by ISRO's commercial arm Antrix. And now NSIL has also been introduced. So what is the difference between Antrix and NSIL? Antrix will handle ISRO's commercial deal for satellites with foreign customers, while NSIL is mainly built for local industry for space manufacturing. So if an Indian startup, for example, there are many startups working in the field of space in Bangalore right now, if they want any help in the field of space technology, that contract will be signed with NSIL. Antrix, on the other hand, will mainly look into commercial deals with foreign customers. The USP of ISRO is that it provides solutions at a fraction of a cost as compared to the solutions provided by other nations such as Russia, France, or US. Thus, there are many people who criticize ISRO's operations, asking whether there is any need to spend money in sending satellites to space when India has so many poor people. But we have to understand the fact that ISRO, by sending these satellites or organizing these missions, actually establishes an image throughout the world, which helps ISRO and India in earning foreign exchange by bringing more clients from outside. So ISRO actually is an agency that earns money for the government of India rather than spending money. The next article is about one more fight that China has picked up, and this time it is with Lithuania, that is an Eastern European country, a very small nation, but the nation that is a part of EU. In very simple terms, what happened was Lithuania allowed the opening up of Taiwanese representative office in November 2021. This is for the first time ever that Taiwan was allowed to open such an office by using its own name within EU, because under China's pressure, no country usually allows Taiwan to open up its diplomatic offices. Even if they do, they don't really use the name Taiwan officially. Angry with this move of Lithuania, China has downgraded its diplomatic relations with Lithuania and called it a violation of the One China policy. Lithuania, on the other hand, is not backing down, and it is expected that Lithuania is not doing it alone. In fact, it is backed up by nations such as the US that want to tickle China on a part of the body that China really does not appreciate. Now, this change in stance of Lithuania happened in 2020 when a new government came in. Lithuania's history also is pretty interesting. It was a part of the Soviet Union, but was the first nation to come out of Soviet Union. So it has a kind of a history with communist policy and has always spoken up against the stand of China and the Soviet Union, especially when it comes to the communist policies of these countries. Even earlier, Lithuania has been criticizing China on its policies in the Xinjiang region, especially with respect to the Uyghur Muslims and in Hong Kong. And they even supported Taiwan's efforts to become an observer at the World Health Organization, a move that China has opposed for many years. Both the countries, that is China and Lithuania, have asked their people not to maintain contact with each other's nations, as we used to say in Hindi as kids, kutti karli. So Lithuania has advised its population to avoid smartphones that are made in China and has also kept China away from acquiring controlling stake in a seaport in Lithuania, apart from making any bids for building 5G infrastructure in the country. There are many other incidents that happened before that. In May 2021, Lithuania came out of the 17+1 dialogue that China had established to maintain good relationship with Eastern and European nations. So it was a group of 17 Eastern and European nations plus one was China. Lithuania came out of that also. In return, China called back its ambassador from Lithuania and put pressure on the companies to stop sourcing their products from Lithuania if they had to sell their products in China. Otherwise, China will not accept them. China has used such tactics of giving threats to other nations with Norway, Japan, and Australia, which has usually worked for them, considering the size of China's economy and the fact that most countries around the world are dependent on cheap Chinese imports. Of all the exports that Lithuania has, only 1% goes to China, while their import from China is much more as expected. Thus, the move is expected to hurt the economy of Lithuania. However, Lithuania is not backing down. That is also because at present, the government in Lithuania is a coalition government. So the president of the country is not really that opposed to China, but it is the coalition partners, that is the smaller partners in the government, that don't want good relationship with China. And that is why the government has to maintain this stand. Now, who is helping Lithuania in maintaining that? US is helping that allegedly from the backdrop, but it is Taiwan that is openly giving support to Lithuania. Taiwan, in fact, made a gesture when a few weeks back there were 20,000 bottles of rum made in Lithuania that were going to China, and China refused to let them enter. They were bought by Taiwan. At the end of the day, who would not want to buy a good bottle of rum? Then Taiwan also came up with a $200 million investment plan to cover Lithuania's economic losses, and is also planning to introduce a $1 billion credit program aimed at benefiting Lithuania. Just to give you an idea, the per capita income of China is 5 times that of India, and the per capita income of Taiwan is 5 times that of China. So Taiwan economically is an extremely prosperous nation and can afford to offer these lines of credit to other nations who are helping Taiwan in standing up against China. All this is happening when we are at the verge of the Beijing Winter Olympics, which have already been boycotted by the officials of US and many other European nations. Now, let's also try and see what exactly is the issue between China and Taiwan and what is the One China policy. Now, although it would be a very long history chapter, let me give you a context very quickly. After World War II, when there was Chinese revolution in the country, this China was ruled by the Nationalist Party. This Nationalist Party was considered to be a party that was close to the Western countries. Their opposition was the Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong. Now, in the end of 1940s, the Communist Party started to fight against the Nationalist Party, who were much stronger, but they gained a lot of support, so much so that they forced the people of Nationalist Party, the people in power, to move out of China and go to this small island called Taiwan. And it was a Communist Party that captured China, saying that from now onwards, we are the government. So the Communist Party that rules over China considers that Taiwan also is a part of China only, while the Nationalist Party, who came and settled themselves in Taiwan, say that we are a different country altogether. If anything, China is a part of Taiwan and we are the real leaders of China and the world should talk to us. In fact, I'll tell you one more interesting fact. In 1945, the UN was formed. There were 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and one of them was China. Now, the question was, which China is it? In 1945, this was China ruled by the Nationalist Party. But in 1949, when the Nationalist Party had to run from China, go to Taiwan, for some years, the 5th member of UNSC was not China, it was Taiwan. There was a big debate about whether or not the 5th member would be Taiwan or would be China. Communist Party obviously wanted themselves to become the 5th member and they should be given the permanent seat, but Western nations such as the US wanted the seat to remain with Taiwan. Interestingly, India also under Jawaharlal Nehru supported China and said that China should be given this seat and not Taiwan because we wanted to maintain good relations with China. That is why in many places you would see news such as India was offered a permanent seat in the Security Council but we refused, but that is not the case. The reality was the seat was with Taiwan. The US informally asked India that we anyways want to have one of the nations from Asia. So if we try to get all the countries together to take the seat from Taiwan and give it to you as India, would you be ready to accept it? That is when Nehru said that no, the seat belongs to real China and they should get the seat, not us, not Taiwan, because we wanted to maintain good relationship with our neighbor and see what it has given us in return. So since 1949, there has been this trouble between China and Taiwan. China considers Taiwan as a part of their own country, but Taiwan leaders say that we are a sovereign state altogether. By 1980s, China thought of improving relations with Taiwan, but put forward a policy called one country, two system. Meaning that China said that we are one country only, China plus Taiwan. Just that in Taiwan, we will allow a different system of government so you can work independently, but don't tell anyone else. No other country will be in contact with you. We will be the one who will represent you at the world stage. It's not that no nation has direct contact with Taiwan. There are some nations that have recognized Taiwan and that has allowed Taiwan to maintain diplomatic relations with them. Countries such as Australia, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, basically ones that don't have good relations with China, also maintain their ties with Taiwan at a significant level. The US also helps Taiwan significantly by supplying defense accessories whenever required. What about India? Where do we stand on this issue? As I said earlier, in 1949, we accepted the One China policy and said that we accept that Taiwan and Tibet are a part of China. However, our retort was that if we are accepting One China policy, China should also accept One India policy. That is, Kashmir as a part of India and Arunachal Pradesh also as a part of India. But China so far has not spoken on this issue at all. Interestingly, since 2010, India also has never officially talked about the One China policy. However, we have not engaged with Taiwan at an official level because we don't want to ruin our relationship with China on that front as well. The next article that we have talks about the upcoming 5G spectrum auctions that will happen in India and the guidelines given for the same by the TRAI, that is Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. Now let me explain to you the entire issue in very simple terms. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India has recommended to the government before the upcoming 5G spectrum auctions. Now to introduce the 5G technology in India, all the telecom partners require certain spectrum which they will have to buy from the government. Now the 5G, as you know, will give much higher speed as compared to the 4G. That is because the 5G spectrum works at a much higher frequency. So the frequency band that will be given to the companies in India, to the telecom companies in India, the problem with that is that the satellite broadband companies are not happy with it. You would have read in the news there are some companies who are trying to introduce satellite based broadband in India. There is a company called Starlink, that is a company owned by Elon Musk. Then Bharti Airtel also have their service called OneWeb. These are the services that will provide internet to India using satellites rather than using optical fiber cable, which is used right now. These satellite companies are saying that this spectrum that is being offered to telecom companies will clash with our satellite spectrum. And in the long run, we will not be able to establish our satellite services. And that is why government should try and cut down on the spectrum to be given for the 5G auctions. Simple. The telecom companies, on the other hand, are saying that no, our project is more important. We should get as much spectrum as possible so that we can give internet at a much higher speed. So in simple terms, the issue is about millimeter wave band. What is a millimeter wave band? Millimeter wave band means frequency range between 24 gigahertz and 100 gigahertz. This is where the entire fight is. The government had said that in this band from 24.25 to 28.5 gigahertz will be offered to telecom companies. What the government has said is there are four main telecom companies in India, and if we give 1 gigahertz spectrum to everyone, then this range would be good enough to offer 5G services. But the satellite companies are saying that 27.531 gigahertz is actually a frequency which should be reserved for satellite based broadband services as per the decisions taken by International Telecommunication Union, which is a UN agency. Thus, this is an interference on our business just for giving 5G services. Now, there are two ways to look at it. Number one, the satellite based broadband has not started in India and it will take some years to start that. So, to fight for that right now and not allowing 5G services to start in India may be seen as wrong by many people. But the group that represents these satellite companies say that if we give our spectrum that is meant for satellites to 5G companies, then Indian citizens in the long run will not be able to take advantage of satellite based broadband, which will be much better as compared to the broadband that we have right now. Indian economy will lose over $180 billion of business, and FDI will also not come into India. And that is why the government should be very, very careful while giving these spectrum. Now, as I said, the question is about the millimeter wave range that is from 24 to 100 gigahertz. Now, let's try and understand this easily. 4G services were offered at a much lower frequency as compared to 24 gigahertz. That is why they were giving lesser speed as compared to 5G. The higher the frequency would be, the higher would be the speed of the internet. Now, it is not that 5G cannot be given at a lower frequency. 5G can also be given at, let's say, 15 gigahertz or 10 gigahertz, but it will not give it the kind of speed that you are expecting from 5G. Also understand that lower the frequency, lower will be the speed, but lower the frequency, greater would be the range of the network. Just try and understand this. Let's assume we are offering 5G at 10 gigahertz frequency. That would mean that the 5G network would cover much larger distances. So it would cover an entire city or the villages, but it might not have the kind of speed that you are expecting from 5G. On the other hand, if you are giving 5G, let's say at 25 gigahertz, the good part will be that the speed will be extremely high, 1 or 2 gigabits, but the range in that case will be lower. So high speed 5G internet may only be given inside the main centers of the city, not in the villages and not in the entire city. So you have to choose between the two. Do you want to give extremely high speed but only in a few areas? Or do you want to give lower speed but in a large number of areas? That is a decision that you have to take. Government, by offering the millimeter waves to the 5G companies, is now saying that we want to offer high speed even if it is for a low range. That is what you have to understand. The satellite companies are saying that the telecom companies can offer 5G services lower than 24 gigahertz also. What is the problem with that? In India, people are not expecting such a high speed anyway. But for satellite companies, there is no option but to go between these ranges only. So we don't have an alternative, but the telecom companies do have an alternative. So why should the government not use that? The satellite broadband companies use the low Earth orbit satellite to give internet, and they work in the range of 24.25 to 27.5 gigahertz only, and that is an ideal range for them. Yes, this is for the future, but if we are already providing this band to the 5G telecoms, then we are closing the door on the satellite based broadband in India once and forever. As I said, the satellite broadband companies are saying that 5G can also operate at 3.3 to 3.67 gigahertz. Why do you want to go so high to 24 gigahertz? This is good enough for them. India anyways is not expecting a speed of 1 or 2 gigabits in their mobile phone. This would also be a very good speed, much more than the 4G speed that we are getting. Each telecom operator will get 80 to 90 megahertz to function. That will be good enough. But the telecom companies obviously are not happy with this. They want a much higher frequency range. so that they can offer faster services and attract more people towards their network. Now, although I tried to make you understand in very simple terms, let me try and simplify this once again to make you understand what is happening with 5G in India. Mainly for using 5G, you have three key spectrums. There is a lower spectrum that is called under 1 gigahertz spectrum, low band. Then the second band is between 1 and 6 gigahertz. This is the middle band. And then the third is the band that we are talking about, which is between 24 and 100 gigahertz. The lower will be your band, the more will be your range, but lower will be your speed. So for rural development, so for giving internet in the rural areas, the telecom companies should get low band spectrum so that they can build a network. Low band spectrum will give you much higher range, but at the cost of the speed. For intercity connectivity between 2 or 3 cities, you can opt for a mid-band spectrum, mid-speed and mid-range. For main cities, you can go for mmWave, which provides very high connectivity. But again, you have to choose one between speed and range, whichever is the best for you. Now, to be true, providing 5G internet with using mmWave, that is extremely high speed, is not that important in India if you actually try to see the truth. The only application of mmWave would be for some metro cities where population is growing at a very high pace. But for the telecom companies, it would make much better business sense to opt for a middle or a low end spectrum to reduce their cost also and to cover much larger areas as well. But at the end of the day, it depends on the government, whatever the government decides with that particular spectrum, because it is a public good at the end of the day. These were the articles we had to discuss on the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, discuss the role played by ISRO in making India a global space power. Also, throw light on some of the challenges faced by ISRO in the present times. Second, is it time to go back to the Gandhian version of socialism to propel India's development in the next few decades? Give supporting arguments. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.